What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Juicy Jet Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Rooney, and I know I said I was only going to do this once a week, but it's never a dull moment in Jets land. We have some more juicy news that we need to talk about. It's just been a week full of juice, which is great. We officially have our leadership team assembled with the New York Jets. So we saw a couple days ago, we hired Aaron Glenn to be our head coach. And today, we just found out a few hours ago that Darren Muji is going to be our general manager. So the leadership team is in place, and officially the new era of the New York Jets is underway. So very exciting stuff, kicking us off. With a search that lasted forever. This feels like we haven't had a GM or a head coach in a year and a half. So it's really nice to be in this position where we know what this is going to look like moving forward. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about the pairing of Darren Muji and Aaron Glenn, talk a little bit about what that's like, obviously give you all the background on Darren, where he came from, what he did in college, what he did in the NFL, and how he moved up so quickly to where he is today. And then we'll talk a little bit about what are the things that he needs to do moving forward to move the Jets along. How are we going to get to the playoffs and end this run? It's going to be a really interesting couple months as we start to think about those things. And then if there's a couple things about him that we want to talk about too, I'm going to throw some little tidbits that I found out over the past couple days about him in here. So with that, before we get started, let's just talk about one of the funniest things that I found out about Darren Muji and Aaron Glenn. Darren Muji is 6'6", 230 pounds. Aaron Glenn is 5'8". It is going to be hilarious watching the two of them in a press conference together, sitting next to each other, taking pictures in their Monday press conference with Woody Johnson with this height difference. So we probably have the tallest GM in the league and the smallest head coach in the league, which is hilarious and so Jets. So I love it. Now I will say before we go into the rest of this too, aside from all the jokes here, we don't really know what this is going to be like. There is no previous history of Aaron Glenn being a head coach or Darren Muji being a GM. We took a huge risk by hiring two folks that have no prior experience in the job. Now, the good news is that these two folks have really high ceilings. The potential is limitless with the two of them, but that also means they have really low floors. This could be a disaster. This could be great. And it's really up to you to decide based on the information we have whether you like the hires or not. From my perspective, I'm excited. I love the new fresh blood. It just feels like a new era of Jets football. It feels like, from what I hear, that there's a lot of accountability. Analytics is going to be brought into play a lot more. These are two football guys, which I'm really excited about. But once again, we don't really know. So I'm heading into it with optimism, but cautious optimism. So it's up to you. I'm not going to tell you how to be a fan. You can hate these moves. But if you're going to root for the Jets, you need the two of these folks to be successful, or else we're going nowhere. So with that, let's dive into a little bit about Darren Muji. I'll tell you a little bit about him, and then hopefully you can make your own assessment based on what you hear today. So, like I said, 6'6", 230 pounds. He was born in Scottsdale, Arizona. He's only 39 years old, so he is the third youngest GM in NFL history. Andrew Berry is number one with the Cleveland Browns, and the other one is Ryan Poles in Chicago, who's just like a couple months younger than him. So a young guy who's moved up very quickly. So with Darren, he started his college career at San Diego State. He was initially a quarterback, but then transitioned to wide receiver. And it's actually funny, one of his roommates, while he was at San Diego State University, was a Jets legend himself, Kevin O'Connell, current head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, which is a really funny connection. And I'm just kidding. He wasn't a Jets legend. I think he threw like 2 passes for us when he was like a third-string backup quarterback on the Jets like 15 years ago. So he transitions to wide receiver. He does enter the NFL draft in 2009, but unfortunately doesn't get drafted. He goes undrafted to the Atlanta Falcons. He goes through training camp with them, doesn't play during the regular season, signs with the Cardinals in 2010. After that, his playing career is over. Unfortunately, he just couldn't sign on with any other teams, and that was it. So from there, what Darren has to do is decide what does he want to do next with his life. So unlike Aaron Glenn, where Aaron Glenn went back to his hometown and started to buy up some restaurants and do that whole thing, Darren went right back to his alma mater. He goes back to San Diego State to try to figure out what he wants to do with his life. And he meets Dave Ziegler there. And I don't know if that name rings a bell, but he actually goes on to one day become the GM of, I think at the time they were still the Oakland Raiders. Wasn't a great GM, unfortunately, but that was the connection that I think sparked a lot of this. Because Ziegler then goes to the Denver Broncos. He starts to work for John Elway, and he gets Darren Muji an interview with John Elway to be a scouting intern in 2012. So this is where it all starts, and I love the fact that he was around not only future GMs, but current GMs. Like John Elway was running the show in Denver. Ziegler goes on to become a future GM. I think it's a really good sign that you're learning from folks like that. And then this is where the rise starts. So he's a scouting intern in 2012, then becomes a personnel and scouting assistant in 2013. From there, he moves up to area scout, where he was a scout for like 4 years, from 2015 to 2019. And then he becomes an assistant director of college scouting in 2020. From there, he goes from assistant director of college scouting to director of player personnel to assistant general manager, all in a 3-year span. Meteoric rise for someone who's in their 30s. Now, during this time, the Denver Broncos signed Peyton Manning and they win a Super Bowl early on in his tenure there. He was very low level at the time. Probably didn't do much to influence any sort of decisions because he was the low man on the totem pole. He was new to the whole gig. And then after they win that Super Bowl, they go on an 8-year drought without making the playoffs. So he knows exactly what us Jets fans are going through right now. We're a lot longer than that. We're 14 years. But he gets what it's like to try to rebuild. And they had some great players during that transition. So they just couldn't get the quarterback right after Peyton Manning. So the good news is now as he starts to move up into these director roles in 2020, 21, 22, that's when they start drafting and signing some really good players. You think about like Pat Surtain, you got Bradley Chubb, Bo Nix most recently with the young quarterback that's worked out, Javonte Williams, like injuries aside, Cortland Sutton. You look at some of these great players they have, Nick Bonito, and a lot of that can be attributed back to the front office, and that's where Darren played a huge role. And he learned under George Patton, who is the current general manager there. And the Jets tried to interview him like 4 times. He said no every single time, George Patton, to coming to us. But he got a great recommendation from him, and he also got a great recommendation from Sean Payton. So Sean Payton, he's a guy that should be Jets' public enemy number 1 because of the whole Nathaniel Hackett thing. Turns out he was right. Nathaniel Hackett was terrible. But to get recommendations from folks like a Sean Payton, who doesn't really trust a ton of people, you got to be really close to him. It's a great sign. So I love the fact that he's got 2 good people that's saying great things. And even John Elway put out a statement about him too, which was awesome. So with his time with Denver, it's the Super Bowl 50 win in 2015, and then of course the turnaround to get the team to where it was with the most dead cap in the NFL. Remember, they made a terrible trade for Russell Wilson. It didn't work out, and somehow they were paying him like what, $50 million this year, and still they were able to make the playoffs with all the cap troubles, which we are going to have. Joe Douglas pushed so much money down the road that we're going to be stuck paying people that aren't on the team anymore for the next 2 to 3 years, including the big Aaron Rodgers decision. So he's used to that entire situation, which is great. So he goes into the interview process with the Jets. There's 16 people that were interviewed overall, and he gets down to the final 3. We all thought it was going to be Lance Newmark because of the connections to Aaron Glenn, but out of nowhere, they bring in Muji and they bring in one other guy from the Bengals, was Trey Brown. And what happens? They go with Muji. And I think the great part about it is there aren't ties to Aaron Glenn. Sure, there's connections, like Sean Payton, for example. But the fact that they don't know each other, I think, is great because there's not going to be that groupthink. Like, I didn't really want people who have worked together for forever because I just don't think that brings in new ideas, new creativity. I think people get stuck in their ways and get comfortable very quickly. And from everything we hear, everyone feels that they're going to work really well together because they're both football guys, scouts at heart. They're both going to hold each other accountable. They love the analytics side of the game. So I think it's going to really change the way we think about football from a Jets perspective. So very excited about it. So now let's talk about some of the things that he's going to have to do right away. Number one, we talked about it, Aaron Rodgers. We're in a very tough spot. Aaron Rodgers is owed like $60 million next year. If he doesn't play, we can either pay the $60 million, we can spread it out over 2 years. If he does play, then that money we pay him some, the dead money gets pushed in 2026, 2027. So it's a tough decision. If it's a football decision, I think you bring Aaron Rodgers back. The money part of it is really tough. With that comes the contract of Davante Adams. What does that mean if Aaron comes back? Do we pay Davante Adams too? I'm assuming they want to play together. And then on top of that, we got to extend that, 2022 draft class? Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner, Breece Hall, Jermaine Johnson. AVT is up for a new contract soon. I know Quincy Williams is going to be up for a contract soon. What do we do with those players? So there's a lot of financial ramifications that he's going to have to deal with. And this is one thing that I'm not pumped about with Darren Muji is he does not come from the finance background. There is no history of, finance in his background, and he's going to need to bring someone in that can help with that part of our organization. So I'm very curious to see if he brings on any experienced folks to help, because that's something that you can't miss on. You can't miss on the finances, and both him and Aaron Glenn don't have any experience there. Aside from that, a place that I feel like he's going to do really well is we got the 7th overall pick in the draft this year. I think we have 8 selections overall. I would love to get some more picks if humanly possible. So it's going to be very interesting to see what he does, but I'm very intrigued by his scouting background, which I think is going to help. And then finally, it's just how do we deal with the salary cap that we have for this year? That's going to be another big point. Who are some of the free agents that we can bring in? How do we work on a budget? Is there anything creative when it comes to trades like they did with John Franklin Myers, getting him from us last year? I think that'll be really interesting to see with Darren Muji. So with that is a little bit about Darren. I'm very excited about him and Aaron Glenn. I think there's just so much potential to have like 2 young, dynamic, fresh minds coming into an organization where Aaron Glenn knows the Jets. Darren Muji knows what it's like to come out of a playoff drought. And they come with really great mentors to help them. When you look back, we talked about Bill Parcells, Bill Belichick, Sean Payton, John Elway, Dave Ziegler, George Patton. There's people all over the place. Dan Campbell, people all over the place that they're associated with. So I think it's, we really leaned into the relationships in this overall process of finding the right people. So with that is what I have for today. Their press conference is going to be Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So really excited to see what they both have to say. I think it's a great. First of all, I think it's great that they're both doing their press conference together. I love the show of unity between our new org, and then I'm very interested to see how they handle Woody. Woody now can take his step back. He's got his leaders in place. His son can get out of the picture as well and just be owners and enjoy, going to games, spending his money, all that good stuff. But time for them to stay out of the way, and I hope Darren Muji has the gall to push back on Woody Johnson in certain scenarios. So we'll see how that all goes over time. We're not going to know right away. But with that is the juice from today. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for joining the Juicy Jet podcast. And we'll probably talk after the press conference on Monday if anything cool comes out after that. So I'll talk to you all later, and go Jets.